Hi everybody, I am theReadingTortie and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be doing the topic of discussion for The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I mentioned this in the book review that this topic of discussion isn't going to be about the moral standing of the book, even though that was the actual purpose after the book was revised. And this is more going to be about the original unedited version and the relationship between Basil, Dorian, and Harry, who Harry is still a jerk-off. I still really don't like the guy. So, in the original version of The Picture of Dorian Gray, it's not a big secret that it had a lot of homoerotic undertones, and it was kind of just straight homoerotic stuff going on, particularly between Basil and Dorian, as is not very surprising. So in the original text, Basil, when he's talking to Lord Henry about what he feels and his confusion towards Dorian, it really comes off as more of a lover. And he talks about how he is in love with Dorian, how he feels this sort of love for Dorian that he's never felt for a woman. And Lord Henry is like, you are not saying that you are in love with him, that you admire him. And Basil just says, I do. And it was pretty much Basil confessing to the conflicting emotions that he feels as an artist and as a man towards Dorian Gray in a time that is not exactly, homo-friendly, homoerotic, homosexual, just not heterosexual friendly. However, Lord Henry, even though he is a jerk-off, doesn't mind. He's kind of like, oh, really? Well, I could have seen that coming. So Lord Henry's always a pretentious jerk that knows everything and could see everything coming from a mile away, even though Basil kind of outed himself as soon as he became so protective over the portrait and over Dorian, especially when Henry's like, oh, I want that picture. And he's like, no, you can't have it. And Henry's like, ho, ho, what is this? A secret that I must know? And then everything went downhill from there. Lord Henry also kind of, I think, is teasing Basil. I think in the modern world, if The Picture of Dorian Gray was taking place today, to begin with, I don't think we would have had this story. But if it was taking place today, I feel like Lord Henry would be teasing Basil. Like, oh, hey, I'm going to totally just become friends and possibly flirt with your love interest. And Basil's kind of like, can you not do that? And Lord Henry's like, ho, ho, ho. And then Dorian just ends up liking Lord Henry's lifestyle better, not particularly Lord Henry. And Basil kind of gets the short end of the stick. And Lord Henry's kind of like, crud, sorry, didn't mean for this to happen. But it did. And now you can just, move on and go back to your life. And Harry is just that jerk friend that ruins your love interest. And he's like, dang, well, you can just move on, right? And it's like, no, I can't. So the relationship between Dorian and Basil, or Basil and Dorian, is so complicated to me because I think it goes beyond that of romantic feelings. It goes into the realm of muse and artist. And that is actually a very intense, manic, insane feeling from an artist to have. So while Basil fell in love with Dorian, he also loved him as his muse. And if you're an artist, if anybody knows an artist that says this is my muse, that muse is essentially what fuels their creation, their art, their passions. It screws with their moods. It's a very intimate, personal, and very volatile relationship that an artist has with their muse, as I'm sure like many famous muses and artists have exemplified. I feel that with the individual I identify with as my muse. And I find a kinship with Basil because of the fact that he gave himself so completely to Dorian, even though he shouldn't have, or at least he should have kept it a better secret from Harry. And to just see him abandon himself completely and totally to Dorian and to who Dorian is and what he exemplifies to Basil, I felt that. And I felt that love and that passion and that desire to create the beauty that Dorian makes him feel. And I feel the frustration when Basil can't do it. And after Dorian leaves and after Dorian becomes, best bros with Harry, I feel Basil's lackluster existence. I feel him become that artist that is no longer this, artiste, I guess is what you can call it. But he's just a guy that can paint cool canvases and it looks pretty. But that's it. But the extra flair, the beauty that just jumped out at you and enveloped you in like petals and flowers that the portrait of Dorian had is gone. And Basil realizes that Dorian was his beginning and his end. And that after Dorian, he is no longer the artist that he wants. And that it is only in this precious window of time that Basil completely realizes his full potential as an artist. And he realizes that it is only in this window of time that he ends up losing, because of Lord Henry, that he can completely honor his muse and that he can really give form to the passion that he feels. And when Lord Henry comes in and screws up Dorian, I just felt so sad because I felt like that was my muse going and being taken by some jerk and just being screwed over. And honestly, I think Dorian would have still become a spoiled little punk. So he still would have turned into a rotten jerk. But I think that Basil would have been able to handle it so much better if his best friend hadn't done it. If Lord Henry hadn't decided to make Dorian his plaything, if Lord Henry hadn't decided to mess with Basil because he knew Basil was in love with Dorian, that Basil, while he may have lost the muse, he would have been able to hold on to it longer. He would have been able to cope with the changes longer, and he would have been able to find a way to keep a special part of Dorian with him that he can't even have or even look at the freaking portrait because it's changing. So absolutely everything was taken from Basil when Lord Henry stepped in and when Dorian decided to make his wish. And it's so sad. And honestly, a lot of people talk to me about this because they know my muse. And my partner asks me, what happens if your muse is a lie? What happens if what you think is there is not actually there, or it changes? And all I can say is, if my muse naturally changes and develops, or if they can just charm what I perceive them to be so well, and it later comes to light that they're very different, so be it. I will handle that differently than if someone goes and just wrecks it the way that Lord Henry wrecked Dorian. And the spoilers, there are spoilers here, so you know. I'm sure everybody knows, but in case there's that one person that doesn't know what the story is about or how it ends, spoilers. So, Basil's death, I think, is very poetic and so tragic, but I think it's precise and perfect. Because I truly believe that an artist can't live without their muse after they've realized who the muse is and they've identified it and they've tried to harness it. I think Basil losing Dorian was harder for him to cope with than his own demise. And when he saw what was happening to Dorian, he felt sad, he felt anger, and I don't know if he felt disappointment with Dorian or he just felt desperation to help him, to make him better, because Basil seemed so desperate to hold on to whatever it was that Dorian excited in him, whatever it was that Dorian was to him. He is so in love, in my opinion, that he wants to forget that that's Dorian, and he just wants to make it better. He doesn't want to be the voice of I told you so. He wants to be the okay, let me help you, let's make this better. But Dorian is not having that. And when Dorian stabs Basil, I think that Basil, while he feels betrayal and terror and horror at what took place, I can't help but feel like that was the way he had to end, and he knows it. And that while he bled out in front of his portrait of Dorian, in front of the god that Dorian is essentially look-alike, in person, I feel like Basil realized that this is the only way that he could have honored Dorian and what Dorian was to him, that Dorian was the beginning and Dorian was his end. And that if his Dorian was gone, if his Dorian changed, if his Dorian was no longer in this existence, his life had no more meaning because he was no longer an artist. He was just a painter without the passion that Dorian gave him. So while tragic and so sad, I think that Basil dying the way he did was the ultimate just relinquishing of his feelings, was him completely succumbing and absolutely giving himself to his art, his craft, and his true love, who was Dorian. And it's so poetic, it's so tragic, so sad. And while I don't think this was inevitable, because I do think Dorian was going to be a punk, with or without Henry, I feel like Dorian wouldn't have had to die. I feel like Dorian would have gone through his punky phase, and then he would have been like, no, Basil's okay. And then they might have been able to rekindle some sort of a friendship, relationship, anything. But I feel like Basil would have held on to that portrait of Dorian. He would have gone to Dorian's house every day, gone to see it, gone to make a copy of it, gone to do something to harness and keep and hold on to him, whatever Dorian was to him at that beautiful window of time, until Dorian returned to him. And that's how I feel like the story could have gone, if Lord Henry hadn't gone into the picture and screwed it up. That is also why the ending of Dorian, more spoilers, when Dorian dies, I feel like it's so poetic. And when he died, in my sick mind, all I saw was him dying where Basil died. And Basil's ghost waiting there for him. And Basil feeling sad for Dorian. And I feel like Basil sat in that attic and looked at Dorian every single day and was just waiting for their time to reunite again. I feel like when Dorian died, that Basil was there, and Basil took him and said, it's okay, Dorian, we can go now. And if Dorian was doomed to suffer in purgatory, in limbo, in whatever layer of hell he was going to be in, Basil would have been like, okay, Dorian, let's go and I'll wait with you. Because I believe that Basil, when he fell in love with Dorian, he completely lost himself and he became nothing without Dorian. And that is the most poetic, tragic, romantic way that an artist can give himself to his muse, and that a person can give themselves to another person. And I feel that Basil really epitomized the romantic tragedy that this story really is. So while Sybil Vane is the more overt tragic character and is horrendously tragic, Dorian should not have done what he did. I feel like Basil is kind of like the afterthought, but to me, because I lived for my art, because I live for my craft, I live for my writing before I live for myself, I can relate to Basil when he starts seeing his everything of existence slowly start to change, and he slowly starts losing, and I can feel the desperation as he watches that his art is crumbling before him, and that he is nothing without Dorian. And it's so, so sad. The review that I'm going to post is going to be a little more long-winded, but this is essentially what the book is to me. It is the love story of Basil and Dorian. There's also theories that Andrew, the guy that disposes of Basil, it's also implied that him and Dorian have kind of a relationship, but we don't know. I think Lord Henry, this is also like speculation of here, tortie, tortie theory moment. Theorizing with tortie or something. I have to create a segment about that. Tortie theories. I also think that Lord Henry didn't mind that Basil was in love with Dorian, and while Basil maybe called it an artistic passion in this version of the book, in the original one he called it love, I think that Lord Henry was so okay with it. He's like, yeah, debauchery, and you know, Harry has no idea what the hell he's actually talking about. And I think that he was just a jerk that didn't mean to hurt anybody. He was just being an aristocrat that could just screw with people because he could. And Basil just ended up kind of getting in the way and being a victim. So I don't think Lord Henry was bothered by the fact that he was in love with Dorian. I think he was more amused, and he's like, oh, dang, Basil's in love, because he does talk to Dorian about how Basil was different with Dorian and how his art was different. And Lord Henry was like, oh, you didn't notice that he was essentially in love with you? And Dorian's like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And Lord Henry's like, seriously, you didn't see it, but I did. And he's not angry. And I think that Lord Henry kind of knows all of Dorian's secrets simply because he can conclude it, except apparently his like vices and like addiction to opium and stuff like that. But this story, while it's a moral tale by Oscar Wilde, is a love story between an artist and his muse that is not fulfilled. And that, in my mind, that is all I see, is this beautiful young man who inspires so much love and passion in Basil, and he just lives his life carelessly breaking hearts, carelessly ruining lives, not because he's a bad person, but because of the negative influence of Lord Henry and his narcissism. So, what do you guys think? Like, I feel very defeated when I think about this, because I see Basil's tragic ending kind of, I'm not going to say I'm going to die a poetic death. I'm not. It's going to be a horrible, disgusting death. But I feel like Basil's artistic end is something that I fear as an artist. I don't fear losing my muse. I know my muse is going to change. And I know one day my muse might stop being my muse, and it's a little bit of a scary thought. If anybody out there is an artist that has identified the archetypal muse and believes that they have an archetypal muse in the sense of the word, like, how do you feel about the loss of that muse, and how does that affect you and your art? Do you feel afraid? Because when I think about it, I worry, but I try to find ways to keep what that person creates in me, so that when the time comes that they have changed, when the time comes that they are tragically no longer my muse, which hopefully doesn't happen, but you never know, I want to be able to go to that little box, open it, and take a little piece of that feeling, so I can create the beauty artificially that they so inherently and passionately create with me, through me. And I feel like that's what Basil would have done if Dorian had changed of naturally, not with Lord Henry's like shoving out off the cliff. So this story is just a tragic romance, in my opinion. If you disagree, please let me know. I know a lot of people comment on like the morality of it, but I look at the characters, who they are, and Basil was just an unfortunate character that fell in love with a very difficult young man and had a very jerky friend who was just messing with him a little bit, and it turned into this just very tragic ending. But in my mind, Basil's there waiting for Dorian when he dies. And when Dorian takes that step into the afterlife, I don't believe he's alone. I believe that Basil's there, and he never really suffers the indignities that I think he should for the life that he has led. And while it makes me upset, I'm happy that in my mind, Basil gets his version of the happily ever after. So, let me know what you guys thought. This book has obviously influenced me quite a bit. I think about Basil a lot, and I think about his relationship with Dorian a lot. So, let's have a discussion. This book is a classic. I'm sure everybody has read it. I'm sure I'm the last one to the party. Like, punches out, everybody's gone. I'm like, oh, dang, where's everybody? It's like, well, we're here 10 years ago. So, let me know what you think. Let me know if you think that I'm completely insane, which I totally could be. If you, like I said, are an artist, talk to me about what you think about Basil. Did you even think about Basil? Who thought about Basil? What was your focus when you were reading this book? What did you think about Dorian? What did you think of Lord Henry? Do you think that I'm completely off my rocker for thinking the way that I'm thinking, which I totally could be? But just talk to me about this book that has really influenced me so much and that I didn't expect it to. It took me by such surprise. But please, someone, just talk to me. I want to talk about this book. So, thank you guys for stopping by. And please be safe. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.